we are gonna make rye-bread. This is a Danish-American recipe. The traditional Danish recipe for rye bread calls for a sourdough starter. We don't have that, and it takes a long time to develop. So this is a shortcut, and I want to achieve some of that sour flavor that I get from my sourdough starter. So I'm gonna get my rye bread drunk. I'm adding beer. And you can use, I'm using a Danish beer here, but you can use whatever type of beer you want to. This would be a great bread to make with a dark beer, darker, to have that a bit more sweet flavor maybe, or you can make it with Guinness, would be great in it. You can add whatever you want. You can also just use water, it's up to you. And I'm adding an additional cup of water. And then I want to whisk some of the bubbles out of this. And then I add a good spoonful of yeast. And I whisk again. I want to make sure that this is blended nice and good. And you want to use a room temperature beer. No cold beers for this one. Now I have my mixture of beer, water and yeast, and it's whisked together quite well. So now I want to add my flour. This is rye flour. It's called rye bread, so I had to put it in. And I'm just adding this. This is whole wheat flour, plain whole wheat. Adding it. And this is salt. And this is flax. This is sunflower seeds. And I want to add these two. And now I have to have my hands dirty. I'm putting my hands in it. I'm just mixing it together. I want to make sure there's no lumps in it. This is going to be a very dense bread, but it has to rise 2 times. It has to rise, when I've mixed this together, it has to sit in the bowl and rise for 2 hours. And then I take it out, put it in the loaf pans, and it has to rise for an additional 1.5 hours before I can bake it. So it's a lengthy process, but a good bread takes time. There's just no way around it. And I'm just squeezing it, making sure that there's no lumps of flour. This is hard work. As I said, it's very dense bread. As you can see, it's not a thin dough. So you want to make sure to get to the bottom of your bowl, so we don't have any flour lumps. So this is nice and ready to rise. And now it has to rise for 2 hours. So put it in a nice and warm, room temperature, warm space, and make sure that there isn't a window open close to it. You don't want to have a cold breeze on it, because then it will stop its process of rising. And it needs to rise because it's very coarse flour that's in it, rye and the whole wheat. So it needs its time. So I'm just going to rinse off and put this away. And now our rye bread dough has been rising 2 hours. So we take out our loaf pans, add just a tiny amount of oil in each, and grease the sides of it. And you want to do this because the smallest, you want to make sure that there's no friction when the dough needs to rise for the second time and when you bake it. So, have your dough nice and risen, and you just divide it in two. And as I said, it's a very dense dough. Shape it out in the shape of your tin. Press it in. And then you cover it with cling film and let it rise again a second time. This is what takes time. So you do that. I like cheating. I wish cooking was that easy. I'm going to put it this way too. So now our rye bread has been sitting for an hour and a half. And as you can see, it's not gonna rise out of your tin. This is because, as I said, it's a very coarse flour that we're using. A white loaf would just explode out of the tin with this amount of time. So it's not gonna look as if it's been rising a lot, but you should still be able to see a little difference. Now I want to make these ready to go in the oven. So I brush it with just plain water, just the surface of it, to make it nice and smooth. Use your hands. As I said, be careful not to press too hard on the bread. You don't want to mess up the rising of the yeast. Now I take a fork and just prick it carefully. This is so some of the air that it's going to develop during the baking can come out of it. You don't want to have your bread splitting because the air has to find a way out of it. So just prick it like this. Now it's ready to go in the oven, and it has to bake for around an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes, depending, at about 410 Fahrenheit. So let's bake it. So now our bread has been baking and it's all done. You take it out and it's going to be warm. And you try and turn it out of the baking pan. I'm going to need a little more. It may not want to come out of the tin, so just try and bang on the bottom of it, just tap it, and just let it, try and just let it sit. You may have to loosen the edges with a sharp knife, so just be careful. Oh, this came out. So take this away. And I take a damp kitchen towel and wrap the bread in it. This is to prevent the crust from being hard as a stone. And I sit it on a rack just to make sure the air can get around it, and let it sit there. And when it's cooled off, I can take it out of the damp towel and put it in a bag. And I have to wait a day before I can cut it open, because you want the moisture to be within the bread and you want the flavors of the flour and the beer to just stay within the bread. So, baking rye bread, a lengthy process. But I have one that I baked yesterday and I can show you. And this is the bread I baked yesterday. As you can see, it has come apart a bit here, and that is it's going to happen all over the bread if you don't use the fork to make holes for the air to come out of. So let's cut this up. And as I said, a dense bread. And you can see the flax, the sunflower seeds, and it has a sour smell to it. That's rye bread, Danish American recipe. And you want to use a knife with serrated edges like this, and then you cut a thin piece, and the crust is, if you don't wrap it in the damp towel, the crust is going to be really chewy. So, and we want to cut up a couple of pieces because we want to make a Danish open-faced sandwich, or a couple of them.
Is it typical to use caraway seed in rye bread at all?
Some recipes have it. Some of the Danish American recipes contain caraway seeds. In Denmark, when I bake it, I don't use it. But I've seen a couple of Danish recipes with it too, yes. But it's not a biggest amount that you can actually taste it, that it's distinct caraway, but some people add it, yes.